Hello everyone and welcome to the channel with the least inspiring name on YouTube, Ben Plays Games. Last year's Resident Evil 2 remake was an absolutely spectacular game, and the first thing I did when I finished it was jump off my bed, drop to my knees, put my hands together and pray to the gaming gods that a Resident Evil 3 remake wouldn't be far behind. And you know what? Someone must have been listening that day because it's just over a year later and the Resident Evil 3 remake is already here. I've had a chance to play it and I'm itching to tell you more about it. So let's sit down and have a look at whether it's third time's a charm or 3 strikes and you're out. The original Resident Evil 3 released on the PlayStation in 1999, and 11-year-old Ben was a very lucky boy to get his grubby mitts on a copy on release day. It was a game that captivated him, terrified him, and he will admit nowadays did give him the occasional nightmare as well. So now 21 years later, when 32-year-old Ben heard there was going to be a remake, all he wanted was for Capcom to do exactly what they did with the second game. Take that original game, switch it to third person, make the graphics a little shinier, and the plot and characters more believable. And by God, that is exactly what they've done. It's got a similar-ish plot, it's got similar-ish characters, but it brings those things into the modern era alongside better gameplay, more realistic graphics, and dialogue that's less cheese, and more creme fraiche. But where I think Resident Evil 2 was considered to be a unanimous success on the whole, especially by myself, bar issues with the soundtrack and rubbish A&B scenarios, I can't help but feel like they've rushed this game out the door before it's truly finished cooking. We kick things off in the Raccoon City apartment of STARS member Jill Valentine, who it's fair to say is having a tough time coming to terms with the zombie-tastic events of the first Resident Evil, and as if she wasn't in enough of a pickle already, she's also on lockdown and being watched by super-duper evil corporation Umbrella, unable to leave her apartment, which I think you'll agree, considering world events at the moment, hits a little close to home. She has a bit of a melty when she looks in the mirror, freshens up, and takes a phone call. On the other end of the line is fellow STARS member Brad Vickers, who's in a bit of a panic himself and warns her that there's someone, or something, coming for her, and she needs to leave pronto. Before she can even finish having a chat with Brad, a chunky monkey dressed entirely in leather bursts through the wall, and the game begins proper. What follows is an adventure that takes you from streets to construction sites and many other locations as you try to avoid our mate in the leather trench coat, Nemesis to his pals, and ultimately escape the city. As I alluded to earlier, this is a story that takes you through similar beats to the original, but it does move a lot more away from the established path than 2, and to be honest, not on the whole for the better either. There are several key locations missing, and one of the most memorable, the clock tower, is unfortunately demoted to little more than a boss fight, and to be perfectly honest, not a particularly exciting one at that. It's not even a boss fight in the actual tower itself, it's in some incredibly average looking street below, which I can't help but feel is a massively wasted opportunity considering you get to go to the streets early on in the game, then just as you're getting used to the streets, you're taken away and moved on to other locations. You're then looking forward to the clock tower, but as you get to the clock tower it turns out you're not actually getting to play there at all. You're back on the streets, and even worse streets than the ones to begin with, and then the entire section that I guess you could call the clock tower section just kind of ends. And it's a shame, because with that reduction in scope, there's a reduction in exploration, and like most Resident Evil fans, when I heard about this remake, I was hoping for at least as much of the city to be explorable as the original. I wanted to be working my way through destroyed streets, thick with undead, while bricking it at the thought of Nemesis being around each and every corner. Unfortunately, most of that exploration actually comes during the first half of the game, and the second is far more linear, with the city relegated to one short open section near the beginning, the aforementioned rubbish clock tower section, and then a few linear paths later on, which are incredibly unexciting. You do still get to visit the Raccoon City Police Department, but let me tell you, the shine's come off that a bit when we already did it a year ago, and a section in an infested hospital does give the game some room to breathe later on, but to be perfectly honest, it never manages to hit the heights of the first couple of hours, and that is a real shame. That reduction in scope extends to Nemesis himself, and I'll tell you, our boy with the yellow stickers has been done dirty. There's only one section where he dynamically hunts you before he's relegated to cutscenes and boss battles, and it's difficult to get excited really. He continues to evolve throughout the game until he's got tentacles coming out the arse, but as you get further in you kind of think, the only time he's going to appear is in a cutscene or a boss battle, so where's the excitement? I mean, I really don't get it, as they updated Mr. X so well in 2 last year, so why they bothered to give Nemesis this excellent redesign, these better moves, and this ability to stalk you dynamically through the environment, but then not even bother utilising them to their full extent, is properly bonkers to me. And I know some of you are going to say, but Ben, he's got a flamethrower. And yeah, fair play, flamethrowers are pretty sweet, but I can only assume that the constraints to his character were made to get this game out in record time. But chin up guys, because it ain't all bad news. Jill, Carlos and the rest of the UBCS squad have all made a return, along with some other old favourites, and to be honest, they're all handled brilliantly. Jill's strong and assured, but clearly deeply affected by her past. Carlos is still a wisecracking mercenary, but doesn't annoy the tits off me anymore. And Nikolai is suitably evil without ever stepping over the line into cartoon baddie territory. And I'm really pleased to say that on the whole, while the writing is a lot more mature than it was in the 90s, which you would expect 21 years later, it does manage to retain an element of its old campness, which is so important to the series. series. Because to be honest, when you're remaking a beloved franchise, it's comforting to have some of the things you know and love still included. When I play Silent Hill, I know I'm going to be caught in a whirlwind of existential dread afterwards, and I'm probably going to call my mum crying. And when I play Resident Evil, I know there's going to be an awesome one-liner every now and then which takes the edge off things. It's familiar, but it's familiar in the greatest way possible. But that means on the whole it is all the more frustrating that with the characters and script in such fine form, they couldn't nail the Nemesis side of things and create the perfect package. The way I think of it is sort of like a donut, a delicious Raccoon City produced Moon's donut. On the outside you've got this incredible, delicious, tasty dough which sets you up for the filling in the middle. That dough in this case is the story and characters, which are absolutely bang on point. So then you're hoping that the middle, in this case Nemesis and the explorable city, are just as delicious to match that, a nice bit of jam. Unfortunately the filling on this occasion turns out to be butter, and while it's there and you may well still enjoy it, you can't help but feel like the overall experience would have improved if the little details match the incredible ingredients around them. One area, however, the donut game doesn't disappoint is graphics. I'm not going to spend too much time going on about this, as you can see from the video that it looks brilliant, but suffice to say 3 builds on the environment seen in 2 and the RE engine handles it superbly well. After its use in 7 on more confined spaces, I wondered how it would fare with these more complex environments, but there was absolutely no need for concern. This is a city bathed in neon light as you explore streets filled with burning wreckage, broken glass and rubble, along with a smattering of the undead, until the really terrible section an hour from the end. And believe me, I really want to talk about this section because it's so extraordinarily bland, but I think it's probably close enough to the end that I should probably keep it zipped for now. Something that's done particularly well is the characters' faces. They are expressive and a joy to watch, although there is the occasional single frame or two where you can see them go a bit uncanny valley, but it's so extremely rare and the quality is so high the rest of the time that you can't really hold it against a team. And any niggles you do have with the graphics are more than made up for with the cast of creatures you'll encounter, a particular highlight of which is the redesigned Hunter Gammas, which are brilliant looking. They all look and behave equally menacingly, and the development team has clearly put a lot of love into bringing them to life or not to life. That extends to the set pieces as well. They are explosive, tightly sequenced, and have clearly had a lot of thought put into them too. Although later environments in the game are a little uninspired compared to the beginnings in the city, and there is this incredibly weird thing with enemy animations in the distance running at a lower frame rate than the rest of the game. It's something I've seen in other games and I do understand why it's used, but it does seem to happen very close to you in 3, and to be perfectly honest, it looks pants. And while that is perhaps more of a minor issue, one element that does sting a little bit is the removal of the dismemberment system from 2. Zombies use canned animations here. They hardly interact with their environment on death, and most disappointing of all, they can no longer have their limbs chipped away at for a tactical advantage during battle. Again, like the Nemesis stuff, I've got absolutely no idea why this is being removed, but you can't really say anything other than it's a real regression from number 2, which is a shame. And while we're on this topic, has anybody else noticed that the zombies seem to die in the same T-shaped pose all the time? It does make me chuckle when there's a load of them on the floor all nice and synchronized, but you do expect a bit more, and I can't see how any of the designers playing this didn't notice it and think it was something that needed to be changed. And again, I think they would have changed it, so it does point to the fact that maybe they kicked this game out of the door before it was really ready to go. What 3 does have over 2 in the presentation stakes is the use of music. Loads of classic tracks from the original Return updated, and there may even be a sneaky remake of a save room tune from 2 that I'm fairly certain didn't even make it into that game. And I know I've gone on and on about how our favourite 7-foot teddy bear is presented, but the track that plays to warn you of his impending arrival is an absolute cracker, both in the old game and the new one, and it's one of my favourites from any Resident Evil game, but it appears once and then never again, and that makes me sad. Last but not least on this point, the character voices are brilliant again. Carlos, like I said earlier, is fantastically done in terms of voice and script, and it's the same with Jill, Nikolai and all of the characters throughout. In terms of gameplay, things stay at a similar level of quality to the presentation, with 3 building off 2 and adding in the dodge function first seen in the original all those years ago. If you time your dodge right, you get put into this kind of matrixy bullet time slow-mo that allows you to rattle off a few extra shots, and it fits right in with the more action-orientated gameplay. It feels satisfying to pull off, and when you do get into one of the mediocre boss battles, it is a saving grace because it does help you get into a bit of a rhythm as you dodge around all of their attacks. Speaking of this more action-orientated gameplay, the knife is now a permanent addition too, rather than the breakable defensive items from the second game, and again that feels like a return to how it should be. Thumbs up. One thing you can unfortunately say goodbye to is puzzles. They are incredibly thin on the ground in this game, and while there are a couple, they are not exciting. What is there boils down mainly to finding combinations for safes, often from reading files, and it's just not very challenging at all. I mean, I honestly use more brain power getting out of bed. And finally, on the gameplay front, there is an absolute train wreck of a sequence towards the end of the hospital, which I thought should be highlighted because of how intensely mediocre it is. Imagine the cabin sequence from Resident Evil 4, but mind-numbingly terrible and just far worse in every conceivable way. It is such a bizarre way to end what was one of the best sections of the game, and I have no idea why they did it. No idea at all. If anybody can tell me why they did it, please do. I mean, the fact that even when you're killing the zombies, you shoot them and then they burst into a little puff of kind of gory smoke and don't even stay as bodies on the ground. It's just, it's lazy and it's awful. And now, because I know I've been droning on a little bit myself, we need to finish up. But before that, there's one more thing I want to touch on, which is the length of the game. On my first playthrough on hardcore, which is the hardest difficulty available on your first run, it took me about 7 hours, and I played through on the easy mode subsequently, and it clocked in half of that. It's like eating a donut with the softest, most delicious dough, and you take one bite and it's gone. At its best, when you're cowering from Nemesis hoping to get away long enough to catch your breath, this game's incredible. At its worst, when you're approaching naff-looking circular arenas that obviously signal you're approaching a boss fight, you can't help but think it could have been so much more. Am I pleased we've got a remake of Resident Evil 3? Absolutely. It's a dream come true and something I never thought would happen. But at the end of the day, I wish the same care and attention had been shown with 3's remake as it had with 2's. Instead, 3's remake is exhilarating and in your face, but ultimately underwhelming. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit through this video while I went on and on. Hopefully you enjoyed some of it. If you did, and you have a minute to spare, please hit like and subscribe. And if you've got any thoughts you'd like to add, please leave them below, as I'd love to talk about the game with you guys in the comments section.